Welcome to Difficult Conversation Africa broadcast. I present to you the host, Yinka Olaito.
There's a current bill that the National Assembly is considering, titled SB1034, which has generated quite a lot of controversy within the Nigeria environment. The proponent believe that it's a form of guiding and monitoring CSO, non-governmental organization, and civil society, which is they feel that government is responsible for. But at the same time, there remains a fact from the CSO community, and they argue that the bill is not necessary, as what the government claimed that the purpose is to strengthen transparency is basically it's not tenable. Critics warn that legislation could hand government sweeping power to register, monitor, audit, or suspend CSO at a will. So where is the legitimate reason for regulating and political control, particularly when there have been several other laws that are guiding CSO regulation in Nigeria? We have the EFCC, we have the SCUM, we have all of them there, the CAC and all of them. So is there a need for a new regulation that people feel that it is aimed at controlling foreign inflow of resources for CSOs? Today I have with me to discuss this a frontline leader in the civil society organization within Nigeria and globally. Is the executive director of a Nigerian network of NGOs. He had been in this area for a long time. He has been an advocate for open and transparent working environment of non-profit, and is also known in Nigeria. His name is Oluseyi Babtunde. Welcome, Mr. Oluseyi Babtunde, to the program.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, and it's my pleasure joining you.
So beyond the headlines, we are shocked that, again, the National Assembly is still considering this kind of thing. Only what not. So let's set the context. Many Nigerians have heard about SB 134, but may not understand exactly what it means. As a leader within the ecosystem, can you explain this to our people? What is SB 134? What is it all about?
So SB 1034 is a proposed bill that seeks to ensure that government can have information on foreign aid. Foreign aid meaning that grants or money provided by foreign governments to support any government that is not buoyant enough to do or carry out some budgetary activities, or to organizations for them to be able to deliver on their vision and mission. So that law or that bill, it's a bill, not a law now. The bill is seeking to just have information about this type of resources that is being used by either government or civil society organizations to further their mission or their activities as government. So when you look at that bill itself, on the surface, it is pursuing a legitimate aim. Because, when someone gives you money, you want to know how that money is spent. So it's a legitimate aim to also want to know where the money is coming from, what it is being used for, and whether that money is making impact. So in a layman term, that is what that bill proposes to address. And it's a legitimate aim within the conversations around aid coordination.
Transparency.
However, and transparency and accountability. However, the challenge is that when you look at the bill itself and the provisions therein, there are laws that are already dealing with that. For example, the bill says that the federal government or state government or local government, when they receive foreign aid, they would have to account for that whereas they're already accounting for it within the constitutional audit process. When you look at section 80 to 89 of the 1999 Constitution, that provides for audit of government, resources, and foreign aid is part of that audit. Okay, but what the mistake the bill is making is that the bill is now conflicting government public funding with funds that are received from external governments, which constitute private support to non-profits. So, because when that type of resources come, it is private support, not government resources anymore. And that type of resources is protected by Article 22 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So, when you look at the two resources that this bill needs to protect, constitutionally and within international human rights laws, there are already provisions for that. And as we go along into the conversations, we'll begin to show you how local laws provide for, this type of accountability.
Thank you for that. Because some are confused because you said the state is also corporate state, but now we understand that there are private funding that is different from state. So that's a critical one, and that's the reason for this conversation. For you, what are the justification for these? Do you think that government is trying to control? Supporters argue that CSO handling public or donor funds should be more accountable and transparent. Is there a merit in that argument?
For all sectors, we must be transparent and accountable because at the end of the day, the work we do is helping the public. And for us as civil society organizations, one thing that we enjoy the most is public trust. And for us to continue to enjoy that public trust, we must stay above board, we must be accountable, we must be transparent. So all of us as non-profits, we agree, or as civil society organizations, to that. And that's why when I started, I said that when you look at the purpose of the bill, what it is pursuing, it is a legitimate aim. All right. Transparency in the use of foreign assistance, which is valid. However, what we're saying is that can we strengthen the laws that we already have such that we are not duplicating institutions and we are also not duplicating guarantees that we already have? And there's also a distinction. Public funding, private funding, all right? But both would have to be accounted for. And that's the legitimate aim that I think that SB1034 is pursuing. However, we must then now start looking at what laws are available within the requirements of that law. For instance, when you look at that law, the law wanted to create a database. It is imposing some audit sanctions on organizations that are receiving foreign assistance. It has also imposed registration sanctions on these organizations. Now, let's start with the audit sanction. The audit sanction means that as a non-profit or government official, the law expects that you would go through an annual audit. That is external, a professional, a chartered accountant, an auditor. I just wanted to lay it bare so that our audience can get it. An external auditor will look at your book and would see whether you've been transparent enough in how you have received the funds and how you have used the funds. That is fine and that is acceptable. But again, I've said that constitutionally, money received by the federal government is audited by the Auditor General of the Federation. Now, money received by non-profit or civil society organizations by law must also be audited based on the Corporate Affairs Commission's work, particularly when you look at CAMA. That will be Companies and Allied Matters Act of 2020. It asks that as civil society organizations, you must have an audited report, which is submitted to the CAC. on an annual basis. And that audit has to be done by an external auditor. The external auditor must be registered with an organization we call the Financial Reporting Council. And the audit would have to be done based on international financial standards set by the Financial Reporting Council of Nigeria. All right. So when you look at that audit sanction that we now have in SB1034, it is duplicating both the role, the role of the Corporate Affairs Commission to receive our audits, and also the legal role of the Financial Reporting Council, which would then look at that audit to be sure that it is in line with approved international reporting, financial reporting standards. Do you get the sense? So again, that is one. The other is how you then begin to look at this law, because you are also meant to submit this externally audited report to the Nigerian Revenue Service, which would be former FIRS, all right, for your tax exemption purposes. Okay. Then also the SCOMO regulations says that you must have these audits published on your website, or if you don't have a website, you must have it available somewhere where the public can have access to it.
Access it.
Yeah. So when the law then says you must all audit, it's already there in one law. So why are we duplicating that? Are you getting my sense? So again, that is the concern that civil society organizations have, that we already have many of these things enshrined or coded in existing laws. We do not need any other law that would get this that would get us where you are taking us, because we already agreed to that. We are already on that path. Now, the law also asks that there has to be a database that provides this information, that shows this information, like a dashboard sort of. When you look at that foreign aid register that is proposed in the bill, which will be clause 8 of that bill, it says that there has to be a foreign aid register. There is already a foreign aid register managed by the Federal Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning, and it is live. In fact, it is linked to what we call the IATI transparency website, and it is in line with that standard as well, where it has this transparency standard where you can track, see what donor has given money, which sector, which MDA is implementing, and it's also aligned with the SDGs. So that already exists. So when you look at that, it is also duplicating the role of the Federal Minister of Budget and Economic Planning. All right. Now, when you then come to the registration sanction, which is asking NGOs and government to register with this agency, we are already registered with 5 major regulators. And at the last time we checked, we have about 53 policies, laws, and regulations that guides the non-profit sector alone. All right. So if you bring this other one to it, it will become 54. So will we now be doing work, or will we be doing regulations? All right. So we're saying that whether you like it or not, these things are already embedded in laws, policies, and regulations that exist. Why do you want to duplicate this effort?
And I think that, so what do you think? Is it that the proponent of this bill do not know this, or do not have access to this? Or why is this one so important to those who are proposing this bill?
We must situate this also within the context of proper legislative research, including also ensuring that when there are proposals on the floor of the National Assembly, or it's important to think through, is there any law already existing that is doing this? And if there are, what are the gaps that needs to be filled?
Exactly.
If the gaps are identifiable and they are really there, then why don't we reform those laws rather than coming up? Because this is also an establishment bill. This SB1034 would establish another agency of government. And in a country where we're talking about
No funding.
No funding. 20% of our budget being used to service loans and debts. We shouldn't be creating more institutions. We should be strengthening existing ones in such a way that it gives us the objectives or it gets us to where we're going. So we're not saying we do not want to be transparent. We're not saying we do not want to be accountable for the resources that we have received. That's not the argument. The argument is, why creating more agencies, can we also make transparency and accountability easy for us as a sector and even as government, so that we can, the ease of doing business, we can begin to implement that fully and in ways that benefits people and planet.
Yeah, you've answered the next question. But what are the constitutional breaches or guarantee freedom of CSO that you see is being infringed in this proposed bill?
I mean, when you look at the interpretation of freedom of association, all right, the use of resources by the UN Special Rapporteur has been discussed and generally agreed on the floor of the General Assembly. That, when nonprofits receive resources, yes, they should account for it. However, the use of those resources, how it is received, should not be tampered with, or there shouldn't be any interference with that. And we do think that by the time this SB 1034 becomes a law, it would be infringing on the rights of civil society organizations to use resources. Again, don't forget that this is not to say that we do not want to be transparent. We really want to be transparent. However, when you look at international laws around the freedom of association and its interpretation, this law would really infringe on that. And we do not want that to happen. Again, when you look at the registration, says you must register within 30 days. And if you do not register within 30 days, it's a criminal offense. You see, the criminalization of registration itself is against international human rights laws, all right? Particularly Article 22, Section 2 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. You cannot criminalize registration, all right, in terms of freedom of association implementation. Okay. Now, unrestricted public disclosure of donor identities and undifferentiated penalties of up to 20 million and 5 years imprisonment, is really against, our fundamental freedoms of peaceful assembly and association, which is guaranteed by the Constitution anyway. All right. And we have to really tread carefully there. So this bill, as it is enshrined at this time, will infringe those associational rights.
No, talking about international perspective, thank you for raising those issues. When we talk about international perspective, several countries have introduced law regarding NGOs with mixed outcome. What lessons should Nigeria learn from this? Particularly, you just raised some vital points with international. What lessons should we learn instead of just doing things at a will or as it occurs to the person proposing?
One important lesson we can learn is how we need to ensure that safeguards are there. When you look at the critical role played by civil society organizations, we're actually subsidizing government. Meaning that if you get to some communities today, non-profits are the ones providing water. Non-profits are the ones delivering educational services. They are non-profit schools, they are non-profit clinics, they're the ones providing empowerment. In fact, they are the ones holding the fabric of those communities in such a way that we can continue to have peace and security in those communities. When you look at humanitarian action, non-profits are the first responders. And when you bring it back to development or development services, you find non-profits doing a lot in those areas, specifically when you look at, you might say you have provided free education, but the accessories that allow a boy or a girl child to go to school may not necessarily be there. Uniforms, shoes, books, bags. In some instances, food, and you find non-profits playing here. So when you then decide to come up with a law, that law should enable those non-profits and organizations to continue to do that good easily because they are helping you. Okay. If you bring democracy also into the conversation, protection of election mandates and all of that, it's also civil society organizations largely ensuring that we can continue to have a democracy that works for all of us. So what we're saying is, yes, if there are concerns around transparency, use of resources, we agree that we must be accountable and transparent. However, the laws that you are enacting must enable us to continue to do this good while also ensuring that we stay transparent and accountable. So there are lessons we can learn from other climes. We've seen climes where they have introduced such laws, and those laws have, rather than helping to create an enabling environment, they have no doubt, restricted civil society from doing good, and it is also affecting the economy. For instance, India is a good example, but we have a good example in Kenya, where for the Kenya's Public Benefit Organization Act of 2013 or 2023 or 2022 now? I can't remember but it's a law now in Kenya. There are safeguards, that ensures that, you can see this transparency and that, you can also continue to ensure that nobody is abusing the law to restrict the activities of non-profits or to shrink civic space, as it were. So we have models in Africa that we can copy from, which will be the Kenya Public Benefit Organization Act. Or you can also look at the implication of the bad ones to both the economy, because again, don't forget, as non-profits, we also pay some taxes and we also employ. So how do those laws continue to help in ensuring that we can continue to provide those economic goods that also come, from our sector? The Ugandan model is also a bad one from our own analysis. So in terms of spotlight and best practices and lessons you can learn, the Kenyan model looks like someone that can be replicated. But what we're saying in essence is, whatever law that you are enacting, make sure that it largely supports non-profits to be able to do good. And that you are also balancing it. If you will not make this type of request to the private sector, don't also make it to civil society organizations. Because at the end of the day, the laws within the international human rights law interpretation, the burdens must not be too much on civil society if it is not also on businesses.
Thank you. Because of our time, I want to make the next two questions. Then, from your own perspective, if this bill is allowed to scale through, what are the possible implications beyond the CSOs and all the ecosystem? The impact it might likely have on services that CSOs, NGOs, non-government provide for people, disability, health. I'm sure you've mentioned a little about it. And then the next question that look like it is, some are believing that this looks more like a political interest than of public interest. That the election is coming, politicians may be fearing that money will come in towards the NGO that will going to be used for some other thing. What are your views on these issues?
For me, lawmaking is lawmaking, and it has to continue, whether there are elections or not. Don't forget that, we are also the ones that would say that during elections, everything shut down. And now they are still doing their lawmaking. So I don't want to insinuate anything in that direction. I want to stick to the fact that this is done, staying objective, that this is done in the normal course of lawmaking, but that, passing this bill as it is infringes on both international human rights laws that Nigeria is committed to, and that it also infringes on some of the constitutional rights that governments do also have. And don't forget that a bill is a proposal. okay, and it's at the proposal stage. So we want to balance, the narrative.
Okay. For now.
And for now, and while ensuring that those the proponents of the bill, they have the interest of the public at heart. Don't forget also that the public itself benefits from government, they benefit from civil society. And where they have the economic prosperity, they can buy products produced by the private sector. So we would courteously assume that they will rethink their steps, and in rethinking their steps, they would also come up with ways to strengthen existing laws after a after due analysis or what we call an assessment of existing laws. Are they sufficient enough? If they are sufficient enough, then let's keep them the way they are. If they are not sufficient enough, let's review them. For those that can infringe on the rights, associational rights that are important for society to function and democracy to continue to thrive, then we must put adequate safeguards in ways that ensures that we are not backsliding. So, for instance, we've had a lot of progress on laws relating to terrorism financing and the non-profit sector. These SB1034, when you look at it, will take us back to the progress that we've made on terrorism financing laws that the international community is, celebrating, that they are even coming to Nigeria for exchanges to see how they can review and retool their own laws in ways that really improves the doing good for our sector. So we want to, encourage the proponents of this law to please reconsider their stand, but also get themselves educated more on laws that exist. And that as a network, as coalitions of civil society organizations elsewhere, they should really consult with the sector to listen to our demands and also ensure that this does not upset, the good work that we do across communities.
You've answered most of my question, but what do you think is the role of the citizen? Because sometimes uninformed citizens sometimes is a problem to some of these issues and legislative processes. With this, we've not seen quite a lot of people speaking out, and maybe they are more concerned with their livelihood or something. Looking forward, what should be the role of citizen in this as we come to a close?
I think that's why we need platforms like yours. When we come on platforms like yours, we educate so that citizens can be well informed in such a way that helps them to make informed decisions that they can then act upon. And I think that's what we've just done within the 30 minutes or 45 minutes that we've had on this event today, where we have explained things in a layman's language. We have also tried to stay away from, we've stayed objective to say, yes, we need transparency and accountability. We are not shying away from it. However, laws already exist that can help us to do this and do this more effectively. And that for us to be able to do good, the burden of compliance should not deter us from helping the common man or the general public themselves. And I think if we continue to frame the conversations this way, the public itself would see that we are not hiding anything. Because again, there are narratives out there that are civil society organizations. We are not transparent. We are always receiving the dollars and not spending it so well. So I think we also need to do some public communication as a sector. But by and large, we're saying that citizens, when this bill becomes a law, then it might affect our services that you presently enjoy through non-profit resources. It might affect how that is delivered to you. It might mean that we are slow in delivering them. And it might also mean that some NGOs might close down because they're not able to comply easily.
Thank you, Mr. Oluseyi Babtunde. I've been speaking with Mr. Oluseyi Babtunde in this episode where we're critically looking at SB 1034, a new bill that is being proposed by the National Assembly on issue of foreign aid and how CSO, NGO deliver their services. And we've seen some of the challenges that this bill may likely introduce. It had affirmed that CSO, NGO are not really afraid of being transparent and accountable, but why duplications of services? Why bringing in more laws when there are already existing one? Why creating more organization and institution when we need to strengthen our institution? I want to especially thank you, Mr. Oluseyi Babtunde, for this insight that you have provided, and I think that we will come back again if there are other things. On behalf of our team at Difficult Conversation Africa podcast, I want to say thank you, and to our listener, thank you for taking your time to listen to this episode. Like we used to say, you determine what next. So we would like to hear what you want us to discuss next. And then please don't forget to always follow us on all our social platforms. And if there's something that is urgent, you can always send us a mail at info@difficultconversationafrica.org. Thank you, and see you in the next edition.
Thank you for listening to this episode. For inquiry, please send an email to info@difficultconversationafrica.org. Telephone 0809 3160591. Please follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Difficult Conversation Africa. See you soon.